So what I wanted to talk about today is a handful of things. You'll be interested to know that I'm not actually going to be pitching any product today, which I think is probably a good thing. I will, however, tell you a little bit about what the industry is doing, how Mitel is responding to that at a high level, and then I'm going to talk a bit more about what's happening inside of IT organizations. And then as that moves forward, and obviously, the punchline of what's happening in IT organizations today is to do with cloud. So we'll talk a bit about that, how channel delivery works in that kind of a model, and then we'll wrap up. Okay, so just to give you a bit of a view there. So for a lot of people here, you realize that we've seen this movie before, right? I'm also noticing an awful lot of younger faces, probably because I'm getting old. But in the younger faces here may not have seen what happened about roughly 12, 14 years ago, which is a giant transformation where the technology that we're using today, communication technologies, telephony, PBXs, etc., made a very fundamental change from hardware to software. Some people called it TDM to IP, but it was a hardware to software transition, moving things to applications and opening things up quite significantly. And in that time, a lot of things changed, not just the technology, but it happened so very quickly at that time that some companies who felt I could do things at the normal rate of change and I'll just adapt to what's happening and add new types of capabilities and new applications as I go, discovered they fell behind very, very quickly. And then we saw at the time that the players that were in the game here and in terms of the business back in the 90s and the 80s, right, a lot of them disappeared or they became irrelevant, right, or became niche players after the turn of the millennia. It's happening again. I'd suggest to you that the change that's going on right now is actually far more significant than it was 14 years ago. Much more significant. The way that things are changing, it's obviously going from premise-type solutions to solutions that are in some other prem. I liked very much what was talked about earlier today with Morris's talk about the change in terms of what's driving that change as being the consumer aspect of it. And that's very true. Cloud has become quite popular, right, I believe, because it's effectively been, democratized, if you will, right? It's actually been to the point where the consumer is actually driving what's happening there. The familiarity is coming up from the consumer side, and therefore the adoption of cloud is happening very, very quickly. And businesses have to absolutely adjust to what's happening here. Not just the IT business, not just your business, but the vendors have to change quite a lot as well. And we're about to see a lot of changes in this industry where players that you were familiar with over the last 10 years are actually going to start to change. Some will disappear, some will rise, and new players will simply appear out of absolute nowhere. Now, a lot of analysts talk about the rule of three, that there'll be three large players in the end when some massive transition happens, some of them who weren't there prior to the transition. I like this article that was actually written for the Harvard Business Review back, it's actually about 10 years old now, this particular report, but it's worth reading, and I've given you the source there as well. But whenever there's a new transition, such as cloud type of introduction, you get some new players that start to drive that particular change, and we've seen that happen over the last 10 years. And then you get a number of new entrants coming in that start to drive a lot more competition in that area. And so what ends up happening is that, who had initially a lot of share, the overall share starts to drop down per individual, and you get a very crowded space. Now, to put that into context, if you take a look at cloud service providers today, and I'm just pulling up a statistic that's specifically to North America, but the same thing is happening here in Europe, but probably about 2 years behind. Service providers in North America, cloud service providers, there's over 200 of them, easily, over 200, right? And while you've got some major names that are out there, none of them have a significant market share yet. And that just goes to point to where things in the cloud are moving from stage 1 to stage 2. That's basically where it's at. The premise type solutions, on the other hand, are more up into the stage 2 or into the stage 3 area. And so what we're seeing is consolidation happening in the market. You've seen some recent changes where certain vendors, for example, have been divested out of their primary business, sold off to private equity investors, say in China, for example, right? Not to pick on anyone specifically. Or in other scenarios where their businesses are fundamentally changing or declining significantly, where they're having perhaps layoffs or they're breaking things out into different pieces, right? These are symptoms of what's happening and what's going on. Now, in that type of environment, when change is happening, it means that consolidation has to occur. And so there are certain groups of companies that over periods of time, go and play to become those consolidators and to bring the technology back together, get some continuity, and drive the transformation. So Mitel is a consolidator, okay? That's a bit of a different role than what you've seen from us over the past 20 plus years. But over the past few years, we've decided from a strategic point of view that we are going to be consolidating the market on a cloud basis and on a technology premise basis as well. Financially, we've set ourselves up to do this. Now, I'm just going to talk a little bit about us here and why we're doing that, but just to give you some context. So right now as a business, right, if you took a look at us, say, about 12 years ago, we were roughly a $280 million business. We're now about a $1.1 billion business. Some of that is organic, some of that is consolidation. Okay, we've taken a very strong market share position in the industry, and then we've already done over $400 million of acquisitions in the past couple of years. Okay, I'll describe to you the kinds of acquisitions that we're making and why in a little bit. Now, when you do this, the key is making sure that you don't get over-leveraged. It's very easy to do. You get very excited about acquisitions. You get out of control. You spend more money that you actually have. So we're taking a very cautious approach to this. We're using primarily cash at the moment because interest rates are very low. Okay, but at the same time, the ability to carry that money is actually very, very easy at the moment. We have a very strong, experienced management team, and the senior leadership team, particularly our CEO, actually came from a consolidator. Okay. So we have a strong ability and a process for doing these kinds of these things. Now, the context in which we're doing this is around three key elements. One is what we call leveraging our strengths in the core. What that means is that we have a very strong pedigree in premise-based solutions today. Very strong. Full unified communications, extensive contact center solution suite, everything from small to large, etc. But a lot of people are still running older solutions. In some of our recent acquisitions, for example, there's a very strong TDM base out there that need to still move forward towards IP applications and ultimately to cloud. So that's a key area of investment. Maximizing our position in the cloud. As I mentioned, cloud is a fundamental thing that's happening from a transformation perspective. And as we found back about roughly 15 years ago, when IP really started to take off and when hardware to applications transition was happening, is you can't go in timidly. Certainly as a vendor, you can't go in timidly. You have to be aggressive about it. It has to be a significant investment. And that's what we're doing, and that's why we have quite a significant cloud solution today. The other is on the contact center side. And the contact center, a lot of people have talked about the contact center and the customer experience this morning. I'm not going to rehash any of that. I think it was very well presented this morning, the kinds of things that have to happen. But there's a reason why people are talking about from the vendor side of it. It's not just improving the overall customer experience. It's an area of growth right now. And in the contact center side, if you look at just the core of the contact center, it's in the order of about 12 to 15% year-over-year growth. And then if you take a look at all the surround pieces that go around that, workforce management, call recording, contextual experience, as was discussed earlier today, those areas are actually growing more in the order of 20 to 25% year-over-year growth. So that's very significant. That means a lot of the vendors are going to be putting heavy investments in that area in order to be able to maximize their opportunity. But the good news is there's a lot of innovation happening here which will help transform the whole contact center experience. So those are the three main areas. This is primarily where we're doing our acquisitions. In the contact center space, we did 2 acquisitions already in the past year. And on the cloud side, we've done some acquisitions as well. And in case anybody doubted us, I'm sure people following the news already realize that we're still in the process of trying to do certain acquisitions. Now, just on the cloud piece of it, to give you an idea, as I'd mentioned, it is a strategic focus. We're going hard, we're going heavy at this. Okay, and just to prove the point, while the cloud industry, unified communications as a service industry, is growing at roughly 30% year over year, which is significant, we're growing at roughly 75% year over year as of Q2, and that's up from our stat as it was in Q1. We have about 750,000 cloud seats today. So cloud is something that is very important to us. Okay, so enough about us, right, and what we're doing. I thought I'd talk about it because I know a lot of people were wondering, okay, what is it that Mitel is doing? So now I'd like to talk about how this all affects you folks. The first is what's going on within the IT organizations. Right now, and in fact, for quite a long time, IT's been asked to do more and more. It's always more, it's always, I've got to get this done. And at the same time, the budget isn't really getting bigger. In some cases, the IT budget is getting bigger, but as a fraction of overall corporate revenue, it's not. And if you take a look at studies that have been done, for example, by Gartner, where they see that the average percentage of IT spent to revenue has been declining from, back about 15 years ago, it might have been as much as 10% of revenue. Today, it's down as low as about 3.2% of revenue. So that's a challenge. IT's been asked to do more and getting less as an option. The other thing, and as Morris was talking about earlier, was that there is an inversion happening in IT, right? You guys are seeing it all the time. I'm absolutely sure of it. You're seeing people come into the business and saying, thank you for the tools that you're trying to give me, but I'd really rather work with this. Okay, and we talked about the mobile context a little bit earlier, and where I recall a discussion between our then new CEO and one of our IT guys. And the IT guy said, here you go, sir, I'd like to give you your BlackBerry. And he was an iPhone fan. And he said, no, I don't think so. He said, I'd like to put my iPhone on there. And the IT guy said, well, it's corporate policy. Everybody has to have a BlackBerry. You can't use your own phone. And he says, no, son, I don't think you understand. So, as it is now, we're basically a bring-your-own-device shop. We're also a strong cloud shop as well. It's not just our solutions. We've moved to cloud in terms of our overall business. And that was because that as our IT organization was trying to keep up with what was going on the consumer side of it, they were just falling behind. It's just no way. You just can't spend fast enough. And then, of course, as I was talking, that people were bringing this technology in, it creates a lot of challenges for the overall IT organization. And I just want to do a very quick survey on this, and I'm not going to bring up any fictitious companies today, although I thought that was really cute, Mark. How many people here are using something like Dropbox, Google Drive, any of these types of things, Box.net? Please raise your hands. Okay. Now keep your hands up for a moment, please. Okay. Okay, so I noticed there's actually a few people that are lying, right? Because I'm sure you've been doing this. But just about everybody's hands are up. Now, how many people with that did that, okay, did it with corporate sanction when you did it? Right, exactly. Thank you. You can put your hands down. But I appreciate that quick survey. And I think that's actually quite telling. It's happening, right? And I've done that survey now for about 2 or 3 years, and it just keeps, more and more hands have been going up. But virtually everybody here has brought something into their IT enterprise that was not corporate sanctioned. So how does IT and how does the CIO get their hands on that? And what is the new role of the IT organization? Because clearly things can't remain the same. Things do have to change. So another context in that, when I've asked that particular question, is that there's, it's not just at, individual level that this is happening. It's happening on a business unit level as well. If you take a look at some of the business processes that have been brought in, I like this quote from Gartner, but it's just one point piece of data. It's actually happening in a number of areas, where the CMO will be outspending the CIO. The CIO, of course, is covering the whole business. The CMO is just covering the marketing team effectively. Okay, and that's bringing in products in such as Marketo or a variety of other types of cloud services. And they can do that because it's simple to purchase. They can bring it in, they can deploy it very quickly because it's already templated and there's a solution there. So what does the role of the IT organization become in that scenario? Well, they have to become the stewards of the business. And what do I mean by that? Let's say, for example, an employee is with the business and they're using something like Google Drive or Dropbox, etc. And they've got key information associated with the business. Now, first of all, you say, well, okay, well, maybe it's secure enough. Maybe it's fine, okay? But what happens when that employee leaves? Where's the information? Where's the data? It's gone, right? Or potentially gone. How about the scenario where the CMO has got Marketo going, you've got supply chain using SAP, right? And you've got somebody else using another type of process. How do you keep the information consistent? And how does Marketo, for example, translate to a sales, a sales engagement, right, in a CRM type solution? And how does that information then make its way into SAP? Now, if that all goes cloud, which it is, then the key question is, how do you pull all of that together and make sure that the IT, or not the IT organization, but the business is able to keep all of that information flowing properly so that information is actually processed? These are key things that are important. So while IT may be doing less of the actual implementation, they are doing much more around management of these key areas, such as identity and security, right? Availability, business continuity. All of these things become the new mandate of the CIO. And you have to make sure that you have the procurement processes in place in order to be able to do these kinds of things. The other key fallout of this is that with all this change going on, the last thing the IT organization needs is for somebody to say, I'm going to completely change everything you do, because now that's an investment. So if there are cloud solutions that can say, I'm going to change the way that you do this, but I'm not going to disrupt your business. I'm simply going to give you the benefit of the cloud. That is a much more compelling discussion. It's much more interesting. It simplifies life because now the IT organization can go and focus on the other issues within the business. So to put that into context as well, when we take a look at individual businesses, they're not all one size fits all. I guarantee you, and that, remember the old saying there where they said a small business wants to pretend and have the image of being a big business? Well, sure, they probably do in a lot of cases, but they still operate as small businesses because they still have a handful of employees, and the way they communicate, the way they interact is still the way that they used to do it. So small businesses have completely different needs than, say, a medium business or a large business. A small business is easy to, when you're taking a look at something like a communication system, the typical model for that is you take one out, you buy a new one, you put it in. There's no migration involved, there's nothing there. And that's one of the reasons that public cloud solutions have done so well down in that part of the market. It's pure displacement. When you get to the mid-sized business or you get to enterprises, there's an investment there. And so when you're looking at a communication system, It's often tied into things like your CRM system or your customer flow processes or the way that you deal with communication with the outside world. All of that is tied into the way you do things. And so doing a simple displacement and saying, I'm going to take a solution that was built for SMB and I'm going to apply it to the mid and the large business is a highly disruptive process. And let's even assume for a second that all the features were there, right? It's still quite disruptive if it's not built with the business in mind. When you get to extra large enterprises, and is anybody here more than 10,000 employees? Okay. Oh, good. Okay. Well, extra large businesses are actually quite different. They're not quite like a large enterprise. They've had to deal with mass deployment type solutions, and other types of technologies are required to do that. So why I'm breaking that out is just to make sure that you understand that when people are selling you cloud solutions and they say, I've got this great cloud solution, right? Everybody from small to extra large can use the same solution. That just doesn't make sense, okay? There are some cases where that makes sense, but it's very rare. The other thing to keep in mind is what's actually happening. And if you take a look at the specific here that I took for Western Europe, is a specific cloud growth. Now, SaaS, right, is fairly easy to understand. That's a scenario where people are taking a product that they had on-prem and they're buying a cloud solution now directly, okay? And sure, there's lots of growth. I talked about the growth rate associated with that a little while ago. What is interesting is what's happening on the infrastructure as a service side of it. Because when you look at that and you say, well, what's got infrastructure as a service got to do with my processes and it has to do with my, how I'd buy, say, unified communications as a service? It's a lead indicator of what's happening. Because what that is, if you take a look at what's happened in businesses over the last 10 years, is they've consolidated the equipment, the technology, their applications into the data center. Then they virtualized. And now after that, the question is, if you've already done that, and they do infrastructure as a service, as IT organizations do infrastructure as a service, anything that was in that environment goes along for the ride. So why is that important? Right? When I just break it out this way, this is the consolidation that I was talking about. Break that out. Why is that important? It means that if you have, not everybody here is going to go to cloud right away, right? You've probably done your data center consolidation, et cetera, but what's really quite important, especially if you're a larger business, is that you do need to have a strategy that brings everything and prepares it for being able to go to private cloud. And the vast majority of large enterprises go to private cloud first. Some actually do go to public cloud, but the vast majority go to private cloud. So that's a piece in terms of the overall evolution flow you need to be able to keep into context. It doesn't have to be a large leap. It can be a nice transitionary process. SMBs, on the other hand, tend to go one of two ways, depending a bit on the complexity within business. They're going either from a prem solution, and they're either going with a complete change out, and say going from not one key system or small PBX to another, but literally jumping into the cloud directly because they don't have a lot of business processes that are tied there. More complicated small businesses do have some of those processes to take care of, in which case they need a solution that's going to be able to go from their prem into a cloud environment and look relatively seamless in the process. The question should always be not how disruptive this is going to be, but more about where is my solution going to reside and how am I paying for it? I think that's the more important question. And then the third element, of course, is what are the benefits that I'm getting out of that? Such as things, and everybody, I think, knows a lot of the benefits about cloud, not all of them, I'm sure, right? But for example, with elasticity. If you take a look at elasticity, well, what's that? Okay, if you've got a contact center solution, and today you're probably buying contact center because of your peak period. So you've got the number of licenses associated with your peak period requirements. But your business may actually be seasonal. You may actually be in a scenario where at Christmas, say, you have to ramp up the number of agents. But then during the summer period, you don't have a lot of agent requirements, but you're still carrying all this license, you're still carrying a lot of the infrastructure, you're still investing in the availability. What cloud does and what elasticity does is it allows you to scale up and down and buy it and pay for it when you actually need it. That's where it's headed with respect to elasticity. Now, you know, it's unfortunate to say that that's not there in every way, shape, and form today, right? But that's where things are going. It's a much more pay-per-use model. Now, when we take a look at the UC side of it, and I talked about the different market segmentation, you know, if we've seen, for example, that in the SMB, it's typically been things like key systems. In the mid-market, it's been other types of hybrids or PBXs, and in the large enterprise, it's been PBXs or some form of Centrex type on-prem deployment. In the cloud, as I talked about, you need a similar type of segmentation, right? You have to have a solution that actually fits within those market segments, that appeals, and that makes sense for businesses of that particular size. As I'd mentioned as well, right, the predisposition for certain types of businesses to go to either public or a private type of cloud scenario. Another good piece of reading is a local firm called MZA who does actually really very good global level analysis. Did a report earlier this year that actually talked about the different type of segmentation and the type of cloud solutions that fit in there. Right, it goes into more detail and more depth about that. And I think that's actually an interesting read. It's not a lot to read. There's probably about 2 or 3 slides before they get into the data. And I'd mentioned before as well that there's different strategies in terms of how those particular migrations are happening. And it's important to understand that if you're an SMB, arguably say sub 100 users, sub 100 employees, a displacement strategy is something that's actually quite sensible. It's something that you can look at. If you're above that, over 100 employees, a migration strategy is probably something that you need to be taking a look at because of the business processes around it. Now, around the business models, there's a lot going on as well. And with all the changes going on, it's not necessarily your traditional players that are coming to you and saying, this is what you should buy. You're going to be able to buy solutions from a lot of other sources. People who never sold, say, communications before, or communications companies that maybe are just getting new into storage or getting into other forms of services. There's a lot going on in this side. And so what's really important in all that mix, right, my little plug for Britannic, I guess, is that it's important to have competence around that, people who can help navigate through this, right? You're going to get inundated with all kinds of different scenarios coming in. But at the same time, new business models are evolving. And the old businesses are adapting to the new business models as well. So the nice thing about all of this churn and this change is it's driving innovation, right? Not just in the technology, but in the go-to-market, the business models, how you buy this stuff. So you get a strong, increased competitive landscape that's driving the innovation. And it's giving you a lot of flexibility in terms of how you can buy. So the old way was you buy certain licenses, you try and capitalize that or amortize that over a certain number of years, and you hope to get the best out of it, and finance took care of everything. There's other ways to do things. Perhaps it's an OpEx model. Maybe there's a shared risk model associated with things. Maybe it's a pay-per-use model. All of these things are evolving much more quickly and are driving the changes in the business that are actually falling back into the prem, not just in terms of cloud services. But just be cautious, as I said. There are a lot of new entrants in this. Some of them are going to be very good. Some of them will drive significant change and are going to be very interesting businesses. Some of them are quite frankly going to end up being fly-by-night because they're trying stuff out. They're saying, you know what, I've sold IT for years. I'm sure unified communications, that's a piece of cake. I can absolutely do that, right? Be careful with that statement. We remember what happened back about 15 years ago when the same thing was told within the IT organization. Just make it happen. And there's a number of people here, I mean, we're long past that, right? But some people who were in the telecommunications space at the time, or in the IT space, underappreciated what was happening and what was required and the complexity associated with communication projects. It's much more than just dialing. There's a lot to it. So just to wrap up, This whole industry is under significant transition right now, and it's important to pick the right partners, the right vendors, et cetera. You're probably not going to make any wrong decisions in this, right? So I don't want to try and freak you out or anything like that, but there are significant changes going on, and it's important to make sure that you're working with credible organizations that are going to help bring you through this. You have enough challenges in your businesses today. You don't need extra challenges. You know, making sure that your IT strategy and the technology strategy that you're choosing is in line with your IT strategy. And you definitely want to be taking advantage of the newer commercial paradigms that are happening within the business, and that are going to be able to enable your business to really benefit from the new technology changes. So all of this is generally, there's a lot of churn, there's a lot of froth going in, but at the end of the day, there's an awful lot of benefit to the businesses, right? We just need to think about how we move forward with that. With that, I say thank you very much, right? And thank you for taking the time to listen to me.